This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted on February the 21st, 1967. The interview was conducted by Mr. Guy Ross. The interviewee is Mrs. Donald S. Kennedy, wife of the president of the OG&E Company of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. This interview is being re-recorded on December the 6th, 1984 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Mitchner.
This is an interview by Guy Ross with Mrs. Donald S. Kennedy, the wife of the OG&E President. She has been extremely active in cultural work in Oklahoma City, in addition to being a world traveler. She reflects primarily upon her work in the cultural aspects of Oklahoma City. Also, she reflects on her childhood in Purcell, Oklahoma, which was on the Chisholm Trail and in the Chickasaw Nation, which was in Indian Territory. This is February the 21st, 1967, and I'm in the home today of Mrs. Donald S. Kennedy. And Mrs. Kennedy, we were talking earlier about your childhood in Purcell, and you came from Greer County, right?
My parents came from Greer County. My father came up from Texas, and my mother from Iowa. And my father was in the run of the Cherokee Strip in 1893. And my mother and father were married in Greer County in 1894. And in 1898, they came by a covered wagon through Indian territory to Purcell, Oklahoma, which was still Indian territory at that time.
I'd like for you to reflect on some of the things that you talked about what it was like in Purcell in those early times.
Well, children, I suppose, would be terribly interested in the things that, as they were then, the Indians came past our house. We lived in this small town, not out in the country, but the Indians rode past on horseback and in their wagons, especially every Saturday. They had to come to town for staples and for the supplies of groceries. And then I was talking about the livery stable, and was on Main Street where they'd leave their horses to give them water and feed them. And sometimes the Indians would stay all night, but usually they would go back to their homes, which just a few miles out of Purcell. And then we also had a blacksmith shop on Main Street, which children of these days never see.
You were right in the heart of Indian Territory.
Yeah.
And the Chickasaw Nation. Were the Indians wild and woolly?
Well, some of them, when they had little spirits, especially, and going home on Saturday nights, you could hear them, and they would shoot a pistol up in the air and ride fast. It was very exciting. Then we were on the South Canadian River, and at that time there was a lot of water in the river. It's dry now, but it divided Purcell, Indian Territory, from Lexington, Oklahoma Territory. And people would have to ford the river sometimes horseback, sometimes in a carriage. And for a small child, I can still remember those days.
What were there problems in fording the river? Did it get
Yes.
fierce and ferocious sometimes?
Well, the horses would start out and then they'd be washed downstream some if the current was real strong.
Did they bring cattle across the
Yes,
river
they brought cattle across, but the thing that I remember mostly about cattle, because we lived on the Chisholm Trail, and when they were driving the cattle from Texas to Kansas to the market, they'd have great herds of cattle with the cowboys driving them, and they would stampede up the street, and children, if we were playing out in our front yard, we'd have to run up on the porch for safety because we were all afraid of them.
They came right through town.
Came right through town.
Why didn't they just go around town?
Well, that seemed that was the road. There weren't so many roads in those days.
So it was the more direct route to come through town.
Mm-hmm.
Were there interesting characters among the cowboys that you remember?
Yes, but I don't believe I'll comment on that. I don't remember especially just that they were cowboys.
Were there do you remember any problems how would you contrast the problems of law and order in those days with the way it is now? Was it fierce and ferocious?
Yes.
Were there
some, but on the whole, I think people were pretty well behaved.
There weren't any particular problems. Were there problems between the white man and the Indian there?
No, they were very, no, not between the white man and the Indian. They were very congenial and intermarried a great deal.
They did.
Yes.
Well, as you were reflecting earlier about the first cars and what it was like when the Model Ts and so forth came in.
Well, I remember very well there was a man that owned a Buick that cranked on the side, and my father had this man, hired him, I guess you'd say, to take our family for a Sunday afternoon ride, and we thought that was great. He'd crank the car, and of course it would get stalled in the deep sand because there weren't any paved streets except just the main street of Purcell, which was just 2 blocks long.
Was it, did you ever come from Purcell to Oklahoma City or to Norman?
I did.
Like
well, then my father bought a car in 1915, Model T, and there still weren't any roads, but it would take almost all day to come to Oklahoma City. We'd take about 4 hours at least.
Even in a car?
In a car.
It'd take 4 hours. Did you ever come to Oklahoma City before they had cars? Anybody ever come in a wagon?
No, I didn't at least. We'd come on the Santa Fe Railroad. See, we lived on the Santa Fe Railroad, which was a great advantage because it was the railroad that we had the roundhouse there of the shops of the Santa Fe.
Oh, I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. Well, before we pass on from this subject, I wish you'd talk about what the wagons were like and so forth that you mentioned earlier.
Well, they're just, what do you call them, Studebaker. Wasn't that the model, the brand?
Yeah, it was. I forgot about that.
Studebaker wagons. And they had a spring seat, and so I remember seeing many of those. And people rode in them.
I guess the prestige thing to have was a buggy.
Yeah.
Or something, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
We
walked a great deal more then than we do now, too, which was good for us.
I bet that's right.
When I went to high school, of course, I finished the elementary grades and high school, both at Purcell. Well, we lived about 12 blocks from school, and there wasn't a cafeteria at school or anything like that. We always, in the the hour's time for our lunch hour, we would walk home and have lunch and walk all the way back.
In an hour's time?
Oh, yeah.
What do the people who live in the country do?
Well, they brought their lunch. They brought a cold lunch.
Deviled eggs.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, that's interesting. Tell us how you, having been in Purcell and those times, and now you're in Oklahoma City and have been in Europe and Russia and other places. How did you make the transition from the wagon days in Purcell to the jet age?
Well, it's been a great life and most interesting. I don't believe anyone could have a more interesting life than I have experienced, and I've enjoyed all of it. Been very active and made some contribution in various ways in helping with Oklahoma City and the Symphony Orchestra. I'm now on the executive board, and I've served as president of the Women's Committee of the Symphony. And I'm on the American Symphony Orchestra League charter member of the national organization.
What have been your responsibilities in your capacities with the symphony and so forth?
Well, mostly just like any board member, and at the meetings. And then last year we had opera here for the first time in 6 years. The Metropolitan did come to Oklahoma City, but we couldn't afford them more than one night, and they didn't want to come for just one night. So there were 6 years that we didn't have opera, and we have many people in Oklahoma City who are great opera lovers. And last year then, I was the chairman of La Traviata, and we had a good house, and we're very pleased with the results.
Someday people will listen to this tape and will look back on the opera having been here in '66 maybe as the beginning of, even though it had been here before, as the reincarnation of opera and so forth
in
Oklahoma City.
We hope so.
You've been involved in so many things as I look at the list here, and I just wish you'd comment on some of them. I wish you'd make some comments on your involvement with the National Board of Planned Parenthood Federation.
Well, I served 2 terms on the National Board of Planned Parenthood, and then have been on the local board for about 15 years. And we feel that we're making progress, not as much as we'd like to. It's mostly finances that we have to raise money in order to support the clinic here. And our patient load for the clinic has enlarged a great deal over the number of years that we've had this clinic and worked on it. Then another thing that I've worked on is been president of the Oklahoma Art Center, and we think that we have a very interesting art center. It's smaller maybe than some cities have, but we've made a fine beginning.
In reading newspaper clippings and things on you, I know that you have been involved in the YWCA and the United Fund and all those things. How have you found time to be involved in so many different things, such a wide variety?
My husband is always civic-minded and community-minded, and he encourages me, and I think when a wife has encouragement at home, and she has an interest too, you just naturally work a little bit harder. When they ask you to take part in these various organizations and work, why, first thing you know, you enjoy it.
Yeah, you must enjoy it a lot
Yes,
to be
I
involved
do.
in so many of these things. I read a newspaper article on you that was written, I think, in 1965, which talked about your having addressed the joint national conferences of the American Symphony Orchestra League, I believe it was, and the Art Council of America. And the article was very complimentary on what you had to say to them.
Well, that was in Washington, D.C. Last year, our symphony group, the delegates went to St. Louis, the year before Washington, and then the year before that Detroit. So Oklahoma City has been represented at these national meetings, which I think is good for Oklahoma City, and it puts our name before these national organizations. They realize that we are active and are interested in participating in the various things.
What do you think the future looks like for this type of thing in Oklahoma City, in Oklahoma and in Oklahoma City?
Well, we have a state board. This is the first year that we've had a state board of the symphony, and we have representatives from, I believe it's 35 towns, and they had a meeting this past month when we opened the Civic Music Center, and people from all over the state are realizing that it's important to the state and it's important to industry. When we go out, when the Chamber of Commerce goes out after industry, why, one of the first questions they ask is, what do you have to offer in the way of culture? And so when we say that we have an art center and we have the Cowboy Hall of Fame with all the Remingtons and the Russells, and we have a symphony, why, they become interested and they investigate, and they say they like the people of Oklahoma, so that helps.
What type of image do you find of Oklahoma as you have traveled to other places, other parts of the country?
Well, many people have just heard of Oklahoma. It's just a name. The play Oklahoma, you know, in 1930? No, it was 1940.
Yeah.
When we first had it in New York, we saw the original cast there. Well, that was a great help because people, the salespeople in the stores learned how to spell Oklahoma. They didn't know how to spell it before. You'd have to tell them if you wanted to charge ticket how to spell it. And then they learned the location of it. And many bankers and people East Coast and West Coast, we'd say, have you been to Oklahoma? And they'd say, no, I've flown over it. But we've, in the last 15 years, my husband has invited bankers from various parts of the country, especially the East, to come out here for what they thought would be the best football game. And many of them look forward to that invitation, and they've enjoyed Oklahoma and enjoyed the climate and the people so much that they can hardly wait for the next time to come.
Do some people have an image of Oklahoma as still the Cowboys and the Indian type thing?
Yes, they're amazed. We've had dozens and dozens of guests that come out here. They didn't know what to expect, but they were so pleased and delighted that they think Oklahoma's wonderful. At least they've been most complimentary to us in their letters and telephone calls and return visits and so on.
I did an interview a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Everett Dale at Norman, who
Yes.
you know is the
Historian.
Oklahoma historian. And he observed that Oklahoma had made, he thought, fantastic gains from a business standpoint and from an industrial standpoint, that the development had been almost spectacular. But he said that he felt like that Oklahoma had not made corresponding gains in spiritual and cultural values, and that he thought this was the challenge of the future to make.
It is, definitely. I worked with the YWCA, and Mr. Gaylord, of course, has been great with the YM and YW, and so as a result, Oklahoma City has the finest organizations in YM and YW of the whole United States.
Is that right?
Yes, we rank fourth, I think, in our building of the YM, and the women's organization's a little weaker, but we're going to strive more.
Well, that's good.
We had our 60th annual dinner the last of January, and we had 100 more in attendance at the YW dinner than we'd ever had before. That's encouraging.
That's good. Have you been involved with the Mummers?
I'm on the advisory board of the Mummers.
I thought you were. It's just a matter of naming something cultural around here.
Well,
You've been involved with it.
Anyway, I think that's going to be fine when we get our new theater. We can tell our industrial people about that too, because there's something, even though you see a movie, is just something special about seeing people on a stage. I think that is better.
Changing the subject a little bit, but you have had a rare experiences that most people don't have from many standpoints, but from one, by the places you've been. And what reflections do you have on the differences in Russia, for instance, and the United States? Went to Russia in 1958, I believe you told me.
My husband was elected the president of the Edison Electric Institute, which is a national organization, in 1956. And so in 1958, then, under the State Department, they wanted a group of men from the power industry to visit Russia. And so they selected 10 men, and there were 9 ladies, the wives, that went along and accompanied them. And we really didn't know what to expect, but we had the red carpet treatment for what they were able to give, and all I can say, it was interesting, and I wouldn't take anything for the experience, but I only stayed 1 week. But all the women just stayed 1 week, and the men stayed 3 weeks and went on to Siberia. The ladies left and traveled in other parts in Europe.
What kind of accommodations did you have over there?
Well, we were in the Ukrainian Hotel, at just 2 years old. It's 1,000 rooms, very large, but their construction is poor because they're working for the government, and most of them don't care because they don't have the incentive of like we have here and our freedom. They sometimes the windows fit, and sometimes the doors don't, and the plumbing doesn't work, and just even in this new hotel, it's 2 years old.
How was the food?
Well, I didn't enjoy it.
You've been to Russia, and then you told me you were in Romania.
In Romania in '64. There was about the same size group. I think there were 19 Americans there, and we had a bus tour. Romania is about the size and area of the state of Oklahoma, and but they have, I believe it's 8 times the population.
Is that right?
And so they have, as a result, they have several large cities, more than we have in just Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And so we had these bus tours to all over the whole country for about 10 days and spent the night. We attended the opera at Cluj, and I saw La Traviata there. And
How was it seeing it there and seeing it here?
well,
Was it quite a contrast?
Oh, yeah, it was well given. Of course, they love their opera. They love their music, and that was wonderful. I still have my program from there, 64, and so that was more of a challenge to me when they asked me to be the chairman of this La Traviata last year.
Did you go to Japan the next year?
We went to Japan in 62 when we went around the world. The meeting was at, the World Power meeting was at Melbourne, Australia. So we traveled east and went to Pakistan, India, and Egypt, and then down to Bangkok and Singapore, and then across to Melbourne, Tasmania, Sydney, up to Hong Kong and Japan. But we were only gone 6 weeks and spent 1 week in Melbourne at the meeting.
If you could not live in America, which country would you want to live in?
Switzerland, I guess.
You would?
I like Switzerland very much. But America for me.
America first. Huh?
Yes.
Uh,
And Oklahoma out of the United States.
Well, that's pretty significant for somebody that's been as many places as you have to make that statement. What do you think that Oklahoma City has made? I'm sure you're not satisfied with it, but what do you think about the cultural gains of Oklahoma City as compared with what we had culturally X number of years ago?
I think we've made great strides, and more people are moving in here, and they're coming from all sections of the United States, and they think that we're doing well, so I'm very pleased with the things that are happening.
One other question I wanted to ask you on this interview, you have made very significant contributions yourself, but a second contribution you have made has probably been in being the force behind one of the most important executives in the state and in the nation, I suppose. And I'm just wondering if you would reflect a little bit on what it's like to be the wife of a man like Mr. Kennedy, as far as being the wife of a big, major executive.
Well, I just don't believe anyone could have had as interesting a life as I've had being Mrs. Donald S. Kennedy, because he is a dynamic person and and a dedicated person. He's dedicated to the good and improvement of our community and our church and Oklahoma City. And I think that he's very sincere.
It must be pretty, I'm sure it's a demanding life on him and also a demanding life on you.
Yes, it is. But we meet so many people that we wouldn't meet otherwise if we didn't participate and take part in the community and the state and the United States and the world that we have. And there isn't anything that means more than people, after all.
You've certainly met a lot of people. I noticed these pictures around your home of Presidents Johnson and Eisenhower. And would you say a little bit about your dinner with President
With the
and
White
Mrs.
House.
Eisenhower?
Well, it was something, of course, a memorable evening. And there was such an interesting group of people there, and the dinner was beautifully served and delicious, and there isn't anyone that's friendlier and more wonderful than President Eisenhower, we think.
Well, that's very interesting that you, having been invited to these things and associated with the presidents of the United States, you can't do anything any more interesting, I guess, probably than that. Well, this has been a very good interview, and I appreciate your willingness to be a part of it.
Well, thank you.
Any final reflections?
I don't believe so. I believe there is.